Well, welcome to you all on this first day after spring break and Monday afternoon. And again, welcome. I'm Dorothy Spencer, Director of the William E. Loftus Health Sciences Library, and I'm pleased to welcome you to another program in the library's History of Medicine lecture series. This series is a collaboration between the Loftus Library and the Brody School of Medicine's Department of Bioethics and Interdisciplinary Studies. And I should also note that tonight's program is also, and the reception that will follow this program is co-sponsored by the Friends of Loftus Library. So thanks to everyone for their participation and their support. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Jeffrey Reznick, Deputy Director, History of Medicine Division of the National Library of Medicine. A native of Rochester, New York, Dr. Reznick received his BA from the University of Rochester, where he graduated magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa. He holds the MA and Ph.D. from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Reznick joined the History of Medicine Division in November 2009, following his tenure as director of the Institute for the Study of Occupation and Health of the American Occupational Therapy Foundation. He previously served as senior curator of the National Museum of Health and Medicine of the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology and as executive director and senior research fellow of the Orthotic and Prosthetic Assistance Fund. Dr. Reznick is both an active historical researcher and an executive in the national nonprofit sector. As a social and cultural historian of medicine and war, he is author of 2 books on the First World War, both published by Manchester University Press, as well as author of numerous book reviews and articles. He holds memberships in the American Historical Association, the American Association for the History of Medicine, the University of Birmingham's Center for First World War Studies, and is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society. Dr. Reznick has lectured nationally and internationally on a variety of historical and contemporary health subjects. He has been interviewed by the national and regional press, including the Christian Science Monitor, the New York Times, Time Magazine, the Washingtonian Magazine, and WUSA Channel 9 News of Washington, D.C. Dr. Reznick has served as an advisor to a number of organizations, including the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research, Howard University's Public Health Council, and the Disability Leadership Institute of the Paulus Center for Social and Economic Development in León, Nicaragua. Dr. Reznick is currently a member of the Disability and Health Work Group of the National Association of County and City Health Officials, an affiliated scientist with the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Human Rights Coalition, where he serves on their coalition's Education and Information Resources Working Group. Dr. Reznick is also a former member of the board of the Friends of the National Library of Medicine, where he served that nonprofit organization for nearly 7 years before joining the staff of the NLM. Dr. Reznick will speak to us this evening on the National Library of Medicine and the future of the history of medicine. There will be an opportunity to meet and speak with Dr. Reznick at a reception immediately following his presentation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Reznick.
Again, I'm honored to be here from the National Library of Medicine, not only to speak on the history of medicine, past and future, but also to talk about mutual interests in expanding knowledge and serving library patrons and facing the challenges of these challenging times. So before I begin in earnest, I'd like to thank Dr. Spencer again for inviting me here to East Carolina University, and certainly also to Melissa Nasia and Carolyn Baker for paving the way to my visit here with all the logistics. And it's been a pleasure to finally meet them after Melissa many emails and Carolyn many phone calls. So thank you both very, very much. 2011 marks the 175th anniversary of the U.S. National Library of Medicine. NLM traces its origins to 1836 and the commitment of the U.S. Army Surgeon General Thomas Lawson to purchase books and journals for active duty medical officers. The occasion of the NLM anniversary affords an opportunity to focus on the contributions of NLM to the history of medicine and public health, and to look forward into the digital world of the 21st century. The time before us, the years that are unraveling now, are one in which the NLM will continue to join with many like-minded institutions, and particularly its network libraries, as well as with scholars and educators, writers and students, and many others to expand knowledge of medical and public health history for the advancement of scholarship across the disciplines and for the education of the general public. It is a time for NLM to sustain its long-standing ties with those who know us well, but at the same time, it's also an occasion to engage with new audiences who are interested in medical and public health history. It's a time to take advantage of new opportunities which abound to broaden and deepen understanding of the past, the present, and the future of medicine and public health in order to help refine critical thinking about medicine and science, promote deeper understanding of medical and scientific concepts, and generally humanize medicine and public health by revealing the implications of disease and healthcare for individuals and communities in the United States and around the world. An agency of the U.S. government, NLM is a component of the U.S. National Institutes of Health, one of the world's foremost public research centers. The current director of the NIH is the eminent physician geneticist Francis Collins, pictured here. NIH consists of 27 institutes and centers, which together employ nearly 20,000 individuals and involve an annual budget of over $30 billion. The NIH campus encompasses a 350-acre area in Bethesda, Maryland, about 8 miles from Washington, D.C. And the institution itself, that is NIH, is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, a unit of the executive branch of the U.S. government, which has cabinet-level representation through the current HHS Secretary, Kathleen Sebelius, pictured here. NLM is the world's largest biomedical library with a collection of over 12 million books, journals, manuscripts, audiovisuals, and other forms of medical information. Under the director of Donald A.B. Lindbergh, M.D. since 1984, NLM today has global influence through developing electronic information services that deliver trillions of bytes of data to millions of users every day. Scientists, scholars, educators, health professionals, and the general public in the United States and around the world, and I'm sure many of you here today, search NLM's online information resources more than 1 billion times each year. Since 1995, Dr. Elizabeth Fee has led NLM's History of Medicine division in its stewardship of the most treasured collections of the institution. Originating from the 11th century to the present and standing among the richest of any institution in the world, these collections are wide and deep and tremendously rich. The scope of collections in HMD includes all book-length material in the National Library of Medicine printed before 1914, including thousands of later pamphlets and dissertations and all pre-1871 journals. About 70,000 of these items were printed before 1801 and about 550 before the year 1501. We hold 90 early Western manuscripts dating before 1600 and microfilm copies of about 600 manuscripts held by European libraries. Our modern manuscripts number an estimated over 17,000 linear feet, including an extensive oral history collection. We have over 100,000 prints and photographs, including portraits and pictures of institutions, caricatures, genre scenes, and fine graphic art in a variety of media. The collection illustrates the social and historical aspects of medicine and totals approximately 82,900 items. We have over 16,000 historical audiovisuals in more formats than I can name in the period of a long period of time. I understand our formats are varied and pose challenges that anyone familiar with historical audiovisuals knows all too well. These include films and video cassettes, slide tape programs, film strips, audio cassettes, all produced between 1910 to the very present. Those of you who've been to the National Library of Medicine, History of Medicine Division will recognize our reading room. Here on the left and on the right is our incunabula room. If you've not been, I certainly encourage you to visit. This is a little bit of what we look like and what you'll see when you do come and visit us. The National Library of Medicine began quite humbly as a few books, and journals, and pamphlets collected in 1818 by the U.S. Army Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Lovell, pictured here. This was material to serve as a reference collection for Army surgeons under his command. The first request for funds for the library, about $50 of medical books, appeared in the 1836 estimate of expenses for the Surgeon General's office. And in 1840, the office issued the first catalog of books in the library, pictured here on the right, the A portion of that catalog. As historian Wyndham Miles noted in his 1982 History of NLM, quote, the entire collection as listed in this 1840 catalog could have been held by about a four-shelf bookcase, shoulder high, about 7 or 8 feet wide. Although the collection grew under Thomas Lawson, Surgeon General, from 1836 to 61, it was still insignificant and quite disorganized if one accepts the appraisal of Joseph Woodward, who served as Surgeon General from 1862 to 64, served in the Surgeon General's office from 1862 to 64. He said of this collection, at the time the late Civil War broke out, nothing deserving the name of a medical library existed in Washington. After the Civil War, the Surgeon General's library received an infusion of medical books and journals from the Army's many temporary hospitals, which closed at the end of those hostilities. To take charge of this burgeoning collection, the Army summoned a 27-year-old career Army medical officer and book lover, Dr. John Shaw Billings, pictured here. He set out to create a comprehensive collection of medical materials. The relentless Dr. Billings wrote letters to physicians and editors, health and government officials and librarians and society officers, requesting donations and exchanges and outright purchases of material for his collection. He approached State Department officials traveling overseas, asking them to bring back foreign medical books and journals. Billings was so dedicated to his quest to build a world-class medical library that Oliver Wendell Holmes noted, Dr. Billings is a bibliophile of such eminence that I regard him as a positive danger to the owner of a library if he ever let loose in it. Billings' voracious reading in the library made him one of the most learned men in Gilded Age America. He was a top authority in such fields as public health administration, hospital design, vital statistics, scientific medicine, hygiene, and ventilation technology, in fact. He also read widely in census organization, epidemiology, and science administration. Under Billings' stewardship, the library's roughly 2,300 medical volumes grew to a collection of some 124,000 bound items. By 1895, the Surgeon General's library was the largest medical library in the Americas and possibly even in the world. Billings' expertise in librarianship led beyond collecting books to his system of cataloging the library's collection. He also created 2 landmark finding aids, which appeared in the late 1870s. The Index Catalog of the Library of the Surgeon General's Office, or Index CAT, and the Index Medicus. Index CAT is a multi-volume subject index to the collection. Today, it's in digital form, located at the URL noted here. Index CAT remains an invaluable resource for primary sources in NLM's historical collections, encompassing material dating from antiquity through the middle of the 20th century in searchable formats, over 4.5 million online references to over 3.7 million bibliographic items. Index Medicus was the first comprehensive index of journal articles in the library's collection. NLM ceased publication of Index Medicus in 2004, and Medline and PubMed, which many of you may be familiar with, lists references from 1966 to the present. Initially, the Surgeon General's library was intended as a resource for military physicians, as I mentioned. However, envisioning a national library is essentially what Billings' vision was. Billings gradually opened the collection to physicians and health professionals everywhere. He made it a true national medical library. At the same time, the monthly Index Medicus and Index CAT made the library internationally famous. By the 1880s, books and journals were regularly going out on loan to physicians across the country, and as technology improved, microfilming and photocopying of literature for patrons followed. By 1895, when Billings had retired to head the New York Public Library, he left behind a dynamic collection of books and journals, incunabula and rare manuscripts, and the beginnings of a print and photograph collection. From 1887 to 1962, the Library of the Surgeon General's Office, officially renamed the Army Medical Library in 1922, was located with its sister agency, the Army Medical Museum, in this 3-story red brick building that Billings had designed. This building was located where the Hirshhorn Museum now stands on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. at 7th and Independence Avenues. just a footnote, I've had the privilege of serving as senior curator of the National Museum of Health and Medicine, which is the modern day version of the Army Medical Museum, as well as now the National Library of Medicine. So I feel especially privileged to research the history of both institutions and speak about them. The historical collection grew significantly during this period from 1887 to 1962. And during World War II, the collection was shipped to Cleveland, Ohio for safekeeping in fear that it might be threatened in Washington, D.C. The library also took its first steps at this location into the computer age. It launched a mechanized system for producing its publications in the late 1950s. This was the reading room at the old Red Brick, as it was called, and the gentleman in shirt sleeves there is Dr. Billings. These were the original rules for the Library of the Surgeon General's office. The library is intended to be a reference, not a lending library, but that soon changed with the popularity of the collection and its the fact that many desire to learn from the collection. A 1956 act of Congress transferred the library to the U.S. Public Health Service and named it the National Library of Medicine, the name it has today. Senators Lister Hill and John F. Kennedy were the driving force behind this bill. Kennedy would see his vision realized in 1962 during his presidency, when NLM opened its doors on the campus of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Designed to protect the collection from possible Cold War threats, the building, quite distinctive building, features foot-thick limestone walls and over 50 miles of subterranean bookshelves. It also featured a collapsible roof, intended to collapse in like this to protect the collections if it were struck with a nuclear bomb. Makes us all feel quite comfortable there, working as we do. The computer era truly blossomed in this building with the establishment of the Lister Hill National Center for Biomedical Communications in the 1970s, 1988, and Medline in, Lister Hill National Center in 1968, the creation of Medline in the 1970s, the establishment of the National Center for Biotechnology Information in the late 1980s, the introduction of free Medline in the late 1990s, and the creation of consumer-friendly Medline Plus in 1998. Also, the introduction of clinicaltrials.gov in the year 2000, just celebrated its 10th anniversary, among many other developments. Meanwhile, all this time, the collection had grown dramatically. With it, the number of interlibrary loan requests skyrocketed, and today, NLM partners with dozens of countries around the world to expand its outreach efforts to consumers and health professionals and the general public around the globe. Its historical and general collections, as I mentioned, continue to grow, and so do NLM's programs and activities, all to support the mission of preserving a national treasure and sharing it with the public. This is the NLM today. You'll see the Lister Hill Center right behind. History of Medicine Division is located as you walk up these steps just to the right, as many of you probably know if you've been there. If not, again, I hope you come and visit us. Through its ongoing stewardship and provision of open and free access to its historical and general collections, NLM will influence the future of the history of medicine field as researchers from a range of disciplines contribute to scholarly debates and public understanding of medical and public health history. Central to this effort are several online databases developed and maintained by the History of Medicine Division at NLM, including not only IndexCat, which I mentioned previously, but also the Directory of History of Medicine Collections. This is a continuously updated database which reveals to users the depth and the variety of history of medicine collections in libraries and archives and museums around the world. There's also the History of Medicine Finding Aids Consortium, a search and discovery tool launched just last year for archival resources in the health sciences. This resource currently includes over 1,600 finding aids from 12 institutions around the United States. We also maintain the Images from the History of Medicine database, which provides access to nearly 70,000 images in the collections of the History of Medicine Division at NLM. Another resource that may be familiar to some of you, but perhaps not all, is PubMed Central. It's a great resource to researchers and writers and educators and students. It's developed and managed by the National Center for Biotechnology Information at the National Library of Medicine. PubMed Central, otherwise known as PMC, offers users full text and full search access to approximately 2 million full text articles in biomedical and life science journal literature. While a significant number of journals are relatively recent publications, and all NIH-funded scientists are encouraged, required now to file their papers with PubMed Central, there was a back digitization project that occurred several years ago that resulted in the complete digitization and free access via PMC of a number of important and historically significant medical and public health journals. So this project took place chiefly in 2004 when the NLM worked cooperatively with the Wellcome Trust and the United Kingdom Joint Information Systems Committee to jointly fund this digitization of a number of journals, including the Annals of Surgery, the Biochemical Journal, the British Medical Journal, Bulletin of the WHO, the Eugenics Review, the Journal of Anatomy, Journal of Physiology, Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, and the Journal of Medical History. So the inclusion of these and many more complete historically significant journals makes PubMed Central an invaluable research tool that may not be familiar to many historians because their work has been traditionally focused on history. But PMC is a great resource that many historians and others in disciplines allied to history will find tremendously valuable. So complementing PMC is NLM's newly launched last year digital repository called Digital Collections. This resource allows users to perform full text and keyword searching within each collection that's located here or across the entire repository. The first release of Digital Collections includes a newly expanded set of cholera online monographs, a portion of which the NLM had released previously in PDF format, as well as a series of public domain films that are all produced by the US government. These are all, as I said, full text searchable. Transcripts are available. And there's a plan over the next many years to include many more films, we hope, in this format to make them fully accessible to researchers and others. The History of Medicine Division also actively promotes and conducts and facilitates scholarly inquiry and public education through a variety of other initiatives, including lectures and symposia, film series, and most importantly, its award-winning exhibition program and many websites. And I'd like to turn my attention to those two programs. This is our website and the History of Medicine Division, and we have icons representing some of the most recent projects that we've launched. The exhibition program may be familiar to many of you. I understand that our traveling exhibition Binding Wounds will be coming here to East Carolina very soon. The exhibition program, as I mentioned, is an award-winning program that develops exhibitions based upon scholarly research and through its traveling exhibition services provides these and other professional exhibitions to libraries across the United States. Since the birth of the program in the late 1990s, hundreds of thousands of individuals in communities across 44 states and at more than 250 institutions have seen NLM's traveling exhibitions, and hundreds of thousands more have experienced these exhibitions through companion websites enriched with educational resources designed for different interests, different learning levels and academic goals, particularly with a focus on K-12 education. Against All Odds was an exhibition that was in the Rotunda of the National Library of Medicine, closed recently, but has a traveling component. Many of you might be familiar with Harry Potter's World, a very, very popular traveling show that is booked solid for the next several years. This map represents all of the places that the exhibitions have been up to late last year. As I mentioned, over 40 states have hosted exhibitions, and we hope in the coming year or two possibly to hit all 50 states, which would be a wonderful benchmark for us. A new exhibition that has just been launched, what we call a temporary display in our reading room, is called Life and Limb, The Toll of the American Civil War. It's curated by my colleague Dr. Manon Perry about disabled veterans of the American Civil War. There will be a traveling component to this that is available to libraries across the United States. And it's just been launched, and I understand on the website today they have the booking form for this, this new exhibition. So if that's of interest to you and your students, I encourage you to learn about it. The companion website will be launched very shortly. The History of Medicine Division is also home to a team of technology professionals who are uniquely dedicated to creating websites which feature our collections and our exhibitions. New sites appear regularly, and most recently they've included such projects as Consumptive Disease, Chinese anti-tuberculosis posters from 1950 to 1980, an iconography of contagion, a web exhibition of 20th century health posters, and a project on murder pamphlets in our collections. We've also done one recently on the Odyssey of Knowledge, NLM's medieval manuscripts, and early printed books. All of these projects and all of our digital projects generally are listed by date at the URL noted here below. Additionally, the History of Medicine Division at NLM develops websites in collaboration with our colleagues across our institution, and particularly in the Lister Hill National Center for Biomedical Communications. That's the research and development arm of NLM. There are two projects I'd like to talk about briefly. One is Turning the Pages. Turning the Pages refines original technology used by the British Library to enable users at kiosks and online, and in fact now on an iPad, to touch and turn and explore in visual and intellectual depth the pages of virtual books, such as the Edmund Smith Papyrus, which we launched last year. Rather than turn the pages, you unroll the scroll. And the Sishu Surgical Casebook. And there are many other notable works that are accessible to individuals now through the Turning the Pages program. Additionally, there's Profiles in Science. This is also a research product of the Digital Library Research Program of Lister Hill, and it's conducted in close cooperation with the History of Medicine Division. Profiles makes available the rich archival collections of leaders in biomedical research in clinical medicine and public health, including such figures as C. Everett Koop, Virginia Apgar, Rosalind Franklin, Francis Crick, Barbara McClintock, and Linus Pauling, among many others. So here we are. We're at an interlude, and I want to invite you to participate in a contest that the NLM has launched on the occasion of its 175th. So as NLM marks 175 years of experience in collecting materials and providing information and research services, and among those that I've described to you and many others, we'd like to invite you to share your experiences with our resources through a YouTube video contest that we've launched just recently. It's a contest that helps to publicize your experiences with our collections and helps us in turn let more people know about them, the richness of them, the value of them for scholarship and teaching and learning. So if you go to challenge.gov and you simply look for NLM, you can learn about the contest. And we encourage you to participate. If you have students who've taken advantage of the resources and learned from them, please consider doing so. It's a wonderful opportunity, and we welcome hearing what your experiences have been. But what about the future? The part of the title of my talk is the history at NLM, but the future of the history of medicine. So let me turn my attention there for a moment. A historian I once met said that to ask a historian to look into the future is kind of like asking a historian to drive using the rearview mirror. I had to stop and think about that for a moment. He concluded that historians make poor drivers, or by implication, poor visionaries, and thus they really have no place looking into the future. Let's leave that to economists and political scientists, if you will. So honestly, it's a great touchstone, really, because I think that point of view is wrong, and I think it's even dangerous to the field of history and to the stewardship of the past and the collections, the stewardship of the past and the collections that hold so many stories about the past. It's actually in the interest of historians to nurture within their communities skills of looking forward, skills of administration, skills of budget oversight, project management, strategic planning, and public service. All these things are really planning for the now, planning for the future. And these are skills that can help make better historians, not necessarily through their contributions to historiography, which is absolutely vital for professional history, understandably. But these skills help to build good leaders of history programs. So just as the future of the history of medicine requires great scholars, and it certainly does, it also requires good thinkers, great leaders, people who can look forward. So our present, it seems to me, in the history of medicine should involve better training, or at least encouraging those who are historically minded, our students who study history under us, to train as administrators and as project managers, because they're going to be the future leaders of history programs. They're going to be the future stewards of the field. So just as leadership will shape the history of medicine and other fields, so will technology. Databases and digitization and the internet, and now advanced mobile devices and what we call Web 2.0. So that said, let's consider the findings of the 2011 Horizon Report of the New Media Consortium, which is pictured here and also available at this URL. The New Media Consortium is the international nonprofit consortium of learning-focused organizations dedicated to the exploration and the use of new media and new technologies. The consortium's Horizon project is a research-oriented effort that seeks to identify and describe emerging technologies that likely will have a considerable impact on teaching and learning and creative expression, both within and beyond higher education. Their primary focus is within higher education, but their arguments can be extrapolated into non-academic environments, certainly in the public sector. The Horizon report states clearly, and in fact very helpfully, 4 indisputable trends that are happening in our society today. First, we have an abundance of resources and relationships that are made easily accessible via the internet. And the internet is increasingly challenging us to revisit our roles as educators and as learners in making sense of the information that we find in coaching and credentialing. Secondly, people today expect to be able to work and learn and study whenever they want and wherever they want. And thirdly, the world we live in now is increasingly collaborative, giving rise to reflection about the way student projects, the way we learn is structured. It's not solitary anymore. Even as much as working in front of a computer can be solitary, we work increasingly in collaborative environments. These are trends that grow out of the previous few years. They continue today, and they're driven by increasingly global and cooperative nature of business interactions facilitated by internet technologies. So, as I suggested, the days of isolated desk jobs are fast disappearing. The days of isolated learning are fast disappearing. They're giving way to models in which teams of individuals work actively together to address issues in rather complex ways. And fourth, the technologies we use are increasingly what they call cloud-based, and our notions of IT support are increasingly decentralized. This trend from the past few years continues to influence decisions about emerging technology adoption at many educational institutions, and I'm sure this one among many others. As we turn to mobile applications for immediate access to many resources and tasks that were once performed on desktop computers, it makes sense to move data and services into the cloud, into this abstract space where much more data can be held and much more data can be accessed. There are challenges here of privacy and control to affect the proper connection, the access to this information, how we administer it. But all of this is rather abstract, all of this continues to make much more complex the data we are looking for, the data we can access, and how and what we do with that data. The Horizon report goes on to identify some key challenges driven by these trends. So this naturally flows from the 4 topics that I just described. Digital media literacy, as they call it, continues its rise, its really skyrocket rise in importance as a key skill in every discipline and every profession, including history, including the history of medicine, arguably. The appropriate metrics for evaluation lag far behind the emergence of new scholarly forms of authoring and publishing and researching. And economic pressures and new models of education are presenting unprecedented competition to traditional models of the university and traditional models of public service, one would argue. And keeping pace with the rapid proliferation of information and software tools and devices is challenging for all of us. It's challenging for our students, it's challenging for those who teach, it's challenging for those of us in the public sector, including certainly libraries. And these trends and challenges are a reflection of the impact of technology that is occurring, in fact, in all of our lives. The Horizon Report sketches out some technologies to watch. And what it does is it identifies 3 horizons. There's a near-term horizon within the next, say, year, where electronic books and mobile devices are really going to come of age. There's a second adoption horizon, which considers technologies expected to gain widespread usage within about 2 to 3 years. And the candidates in the Horizon Report of 2011 are what they call augmented reality and game-based learning. So augmented reality sounds like something you'd see in a science fiction movie, but it's something that we're all quite familiar with. When you go to a website, there might be pop-up boxes that you can see that describe the text, that provide footnotes or side notes to the text. You can click on a hyperlink and open up a video, which expands your understanding of the text that you see. There might be illustrations that pop up as well. So this is an augmented method of reading a standard 2-dimensional text on a computer screen. Game-based learning has grown in recent years as research continues to demonstrate its effectiveness for learning for students of all ages. Those of you who do counseling for students, tutoring, for example, game-based learning has been particularly prominent in those fields. Game-based learning has also been prominent in rehabilitation strategies for veterans returning home from war. I had the privilege of giving a talk at the Center for the Intrepid out at Fort Sam a few years ago, and the Intrepid has a virtual reality room where there are game-based methods for returning veterans to deal with balance disorder as well as combat stress. And then there's also the far horizon. This is 4 to 5 years out that the Horizon Report describes. And these are 4 to 5 years from potential adoption or widespread adoption. And these are gesture-based computing, the use of technology attached to one's body to maneuver through virtual spaces or access information in a virtual environment. And then there's also something called learning analytics. This loosely joins a variety of data gathering tools and analytical techniques to study student engagement, performance, and progress in practice with the goal of using what is learned to revise curricula, teaching, and assessment in real time. So these are much more abstract and, in fact, much more unfamiliar to many of us. These 2 latter are much more unfamiliar to me personally. But the Horizon Report is very valuable because it allows us, as I said, to look out a year, 2, 5 years, to see or to at least begin to map how technology is changing the way we learn, we teach, and the way we do research. And I focus on this for a variety of reasons, but I wanted to think out of the box a little bit as a historian and offer the Horizon Report as one compass among others, certainly, that can kind of force us to think about where history is now and where it can go relative to technology, relative to the inventiveness of technology and how we all use this technology every day and how we might not be aware fully how we're using it now and what the implications might be in the future. So let me bring it back to some specifics and some reality for a moment here. So in key ways, NLM and its History of Medicine division has begun to enter the very first phase of this future. So that would be electronic books and mobile devices. And let me just kind of keep it there for a moment. We're embarking with other leading medical libraries in developing something called the Medical Heritage Library. The Medical Heritage Library is funded by a $1.5 million award from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to a nonprofit called the Open Knowledge Commons. And this nonprofit is dedicated to building a universal digital library for democratic access to information. The project partners include the Countway Library at Harvard, the Cushing Library at Yale, and the Long Health Sciences Library at Columbia, as well as the New York Public Library. This collaborative project aims to digitize and make freely available, chiefly through the Internet Archive, tens of thousands of medical materials from earliest times to the present. So our focus at the National Library of Medicine is Americana dating from 1720 to 1865. We're going to be digitizing, we've already begun to digitize, usable surrogates of rare and unique items that fall in this area of our collection. There are foci being pursued by each of the institutions, and there is a tracking system so that we try not to be too redundant in the digitization that we're undertaking. Opportunities like this certainly abound. You have your own digitization program here, and there's opportunities for us to connect with many other institutions in projects like this. And they're going to be key for the history of medicine and public health as we begin to make these collections more available and more accessible in ways that they never have been. Additionally, NLM will soon launch a website for collection recovery assistance, chiefly through the National Network of Libraries. The site is called Emergency Preparedness and Response: How to Safely Stabilize Library Collections in the Event of a Water Emergency. This project is really in the spirit of Mobile Medline Plus, which emerged from NLM just a few years ago. The site will be accessible via handheld devices to first responders in disaster situations that affect cultural heritage items. There's no other project like this in existence, and NLM is at the forefront in this respect. And we hope very much that these videos that are part of this website and available via mobile device will assist those who encounter cultural heritage items that are destroyed by water or other disasters, and can help to recover them to the best of circumstances. There are other issues that are addressed in this website, building recovery, and how to resurrect an environment so that an environment can be a holding space for these cultural heritage items until they can be transported out to a proper place. The other issue addressed here is the threat of mold for cultural heritage items. Mold remediation is a very important subject that's covered. So this is a project that takes history into this virtual environment and communicates the importance of disaster recovery for cultural heritage in a new way. Again, there's no other project like it, and we're going to be launching it in the next few weeks, and the National Network will get the notification, and we look forward to it hopefully being helpful to many of you and others. So opportunities abound to pursue many more projects like the Medical Heritage Library, like our disaster website for mobile devices. However, these new projects, like all projects today, are going to be shaped by inevitably smaller budgets and rising accountability and expectations of doing more with less. We are already seeing shrinking budgets, and I know you all are here. We're facing our own challenges in NLM and in the federal government. We're facing also an expanding digital world, as we discussed. And we're facing a world in which, even while digitization is on the rise, there are diminishing numbers of printed publications available for collections. So this is all challenging the way libraries build and maintain their collections. And certainly at NLM, we're facing our own challenges in thinking this through and how we're going to collect and how we're going to preserve and how we're going to maintain archives. So all of this leads to another opportunity on the horizon, and that is, I'll just be brief about this, it's rather than collecting, it's coordinating. How can we help to coordinate collections? How can we help to coordinate their digitization? And how can we help to coordinate the knowledge about those materials? So here, too, is a dynamic future for all of us, because we can't all collect. We can't all maintain our collections in the way that we once were able to. So coordination is another theme for the future, certainly in NLM and I'm sure in other places, and certainly here. So in this respect, the Finding Aids Consortium that I described earlier in my talk is particularly essential. How can we be a facilitator of information? How can we coordinate information that is being generated elsewhere and help have it be shared among institutions so that scholars and teachers and learners can have greater access to it. So, in this talk, I've offered you a rich history of NLM and a description of our many current projects and a couple of new ones. NLM has been one of the most influential public institutions in shaping the history of medicine field. As a public institution with 175 years of experience of collecting and providing information and coordinating that information in all areas of biomedicine and healthcare, including the history of medicine, NLM is committed to introducing more audiences to its unique holdings and, by extension, nurturing the next generation of history of medicine learners and scholars and teachers. Indeed, these next generations are going to be the future stewards of history. They will be stewards who will be the next members of our society. They will be people who make decisions about what's kept, how it's kept, if it's kept. They will be, influencing public policy, and they will be our future citizens. And NLM is committed to developing new and innovative collaborations that achieve all these ends, that advance research and teaching and public understanding and public stewardship, particularly of medical and public health history. And to these ends, and in unwavering support of the future of history of medicine, NLM invites you to be part of this process. You already are. It's evident to me, and it's, again, a privilege to be here and to see what you all are doing and to share some of these ideas with you about projects in the future. And I encourage you, again, if you've not been to NLM, to HMD, please come visit. I'd be happy to show you around and make our collections available to you on site as well as online. So thank you again for having me, and I appreciate it very much.
Will you talk a little bit about the relationship of war to the development of medicine? And I believe that's a special research interest of yours.
I've written on the cultural history of modern war. My 2 books published by Manchester University Press address that from a cultural historian's point of view. One idea that I'll put forward that I'm working on, that I allude to in both books, is the role of philanthropy in war. Periods of war bring out a charitableness in society, chiefly for those who are returning home, for the men and women of the armed forces today and their families. And that is a recurring theme in history. Charitable societies are not unique to periods of war, but they seem to take on a new guise or a new momentum in periods of war. And I think that I've written a piece about this, that the role of philanthropy in wartime is hugely influential in how particularly veterans of war receive care, how communities of people who have not participated in war, who remain at home, it's how they give, how they care, how they express care to returning veterans and families. So this is a theme that occurs in many modern wars in different ways, but it's a recurring theme. And these philanthropies have lives oftentimes beyond the end of the war. The Rockefeller Foundation, for example, it was hugely influential during periods of war and has had an influence beyond that. The Center for the Intrepid, as I described, this has been an infusion of support for returning veterans and their families that has been driven chiefly by philanthropy. The Center for the Intrepid at Fort Sam was built by a private citizen. It was land that was transferred to his, it was Arnold Fisher, transferred to his care for his construction of this site, and then it was transferred back to the U.S. government. I think that for as long as we have a war going on, the center there, as well as other centers for the Intrepid, will continue, and I think they will outlive the period of war in many respects. So I'm beginning to explore the role of certainly medicine and war, but also the role of philanthropy. So those are some kind of initial ideas that I'm exploring, partly because war and medicine tend to be thought of in a binary relationship, and I'm trying to break the binary and introduce something else to make it more complex. So those are just some initial thoughts.
Jeff, I'm going to take this in a totally different direction. Great. Can you just say a little bit about the human side of being a librarian in the History of Medicine Division at the National Library of Medicine? Just talk about the kinds of people who come in, the kinds of projects that people do. Sure. Just a little bit of, give us a flavor of what it's like there.
Sure. I'll do that. Thanks for the question. And I'll do it by way of making a correction, a public correction. I'm not a librarian. I'm a historian who happens to play a very large administrative role. No. I'm saying that respectfully. My interaction with my colleagues and with the public and NLM is very different than that of my colleagues who serve at the reference desk, for example. My colleague Stephen Greenberg, who many of you may know. If you've encountered the HMD Reference Division, you've probably spoken with Stephen, a wonderful individual who knows the collection like the back of his hand, and luckily his office is right next door to mine, so I can always go to him if I have questions. What's it like to work at NLM? NLM is very much like an academic environment. There are individuals with a variety of research interests, research specialties, and a variety of disciplines. I work with librarians, technical information specialists, web developers, archivists, curators, education specialists, rare book librarians. I work with people who are specialists in video production. There's a journalist on staff. It's quite an amazing place. I'm privileged to work there, and I'm privileged there because I come from academia, and it's an opportunity to have a role in research, but also be part of providing guidance to other researchers. So there's a public service component to it that I enjoy tremendously. So it's a great kind of, the triad of teaching, research, service. I don't do a lot of teaching in a way that one might define it. I teach through my administrative role, but I do a lot of research and a lot of public service in my work. So even more maybe human than that, we have individuals visit our reading room whose interests span the diversity of our collections. And it's always a pleasure to meet them, to learn about what they're looking for, and if we can help them in uncovering what they're seeking, we try to do that. I think the NLM is, I've only worked in this federal agency. I've not worked in any other. Many people come to NLM and they remain in NLM. And they do remain because of the academic quality of the place. It is diverse. It is, as my presentation conveyed, it is a place that produces many different projects and products for the public, for research, for teaching, for learning. And I think the government is like that in other places, the Department of Education, for example, other cultural institutions like the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, but I've not worked in those places. I've had colleagues who've worked in those places. NLM is a place of diversity, of great creativity, and it's rooted not only in history, but in contemporary technology, contemporary medicine, and we're located on the campus of NIH, so much of what we do is driven by that contemporary environment. So although we're the stewards in HMD of collections dating back to the 11th century, much of what we do has the influence of the very contemporary medical environment. And I think that's okay. I think you can do both things. And when times get a little tough, you have to prioritize, but that's only reasonable. So those are some of my thoughts.
Can you tell us how many medical schools teach history of medicine anymore? Many years ago, when I was a medical student at the University of Buffalo, we had a formal course during our sophomore year. 1 hour a week was history of medicine. When I joined the faculty at the University of Virginia, I learned that they too had once had a formal history of medicine course.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us anything about formal history of medicine teaching today?
I'm unable to tell you how many schools teach history of medicine. What I can tell you from my own experience is that I found my way to history of medicine at an institution, Emory University, that did not have a history of medicine program. This was back in my graduate school years. It was a long time ago. It was in the 90s. Long time ago. And I can barely think back. I'm sure many of you have a hard time thinking back that far. I say that humbly. What I can share with you is my experience. When I did my research overseas in London for my dissertation, I did some field work at the Wellcome Library. And when I came back, I wanted to talk with colleagues, with my graduate student colleagues, about the history of medicine, not only historiography, but kind of methodology. And there was no history of medicine program. There were individuals who did history of public health, like my colleague Randy Packard, who was at Emory at the time, but there wasn't a cohort. And I started a history of medicine group. It was called the HistMed group at Emory in, may have been 97, and ran it for about 4.5 years. So I tried to bring together individuals who touched history of medicine in some way, whether in anthropology, sociology, English literature. In the medical school, there were folks in CDC who were interested in history of medicine. In the ethics and public policy and professions unit, there were people at as I mentioned, CDC, at School of Public Health, certainly at Rollins. And Randy Packard sponsored the group, and we kind of housed it under the Center for the Study of Health, Culture, and Society at Rollins School of Public Health. So that's where it kind of existed. So I had to kind of create the community because we didn't have one. Certainly John Stone, eminent physician at Emory, wrote a lot about literature in medicine, but there wasn't a community there. And I know many historians of medicine came to history of medicine through similar circumstances because there are so few history of medicine formal programs. So that's been my experience. How many programs there are, I can't answer that. Should there be more? Yes, there should be, for any number of reasons that relate to some of my opening comments in terms of the value of studying the past patterns of health and disease and understanding those culturally, socially, politically, economically, in order to humanize medical science, medical decision-making today. There is a value to understanding the complexity of the past, the complexity of history of medicine, for how we provide health care to individuals and communities today. When someone a physician in a rural area goes into that area, they're providing care, but they're also becoming part of a community that is rooted in patterns of healthcare disparity, patterns of perhaps insufficient infrastructure that provides fresh water, to homes. All of these social, cultural, environmental factors can be learned at a history of medicine course and can impact how those health providers think about the interactions and engage with people who they're providing care to. So there's a rough justification for more history of medicine programs that are not only geared towards advancing the scholarship of history of medicine, history for the sake of history, but for the practical application of learning how to be a health provider, whether they're physicians or nurses or occupational therapists or physical therapists. I think the professions across the healthcare arena can benefit tremendously from learning about their own professional history and how their professional history has intersected with specific cultures, specific economic patterns, environmental patterns. I think there's much to be, there's a richness to it that I think so many can learn from. One question for you. When you were at the University of Buffalo, did you ever hear about a scholarship for a Dr. Louis Siegel? There was something called the Siegel Scholarship. It was my uncle.
No, I go back several years.
Well, I respect that. He was there possibly in the 50s. He left, I passed away in the 70s, but he left a scholarship for medical students. I don't know much about it, but my whole family's from Buffalo, New York, so I knew him when I was a child, but I understand there's a scholarship in his name there. So.
Any other questions?
Let me thank you again for sharing so richly with us this afternoon. And I would invite you all to join us for a reception, get to meet Dr. Reznick and speak with him informally and meet each other. And thank you all for coming. And thank you again for visiting with us.
Thank you for having me.